Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, let me make sure I am up. I'm going to make this one relatively quick because I am going to give an invite in this video and I want this video to be easy to digest. Hope everyone is doing okay. It is 1:30 on a Tuesday. I've been a busy beaver this morning. Been reading all morning, actually. I've been doing videos, but also reading all morning in lieu of the videos. We're under attack. Politico has attacked Nina Turner and Our Revolution. Now, this article is pretty amazing. The article is relatively long, and I read through this article, and I said, this is nonsense. This is nonsense. Our Revolution is a group that's like 2 years old. It just started. The article makes... There are a few things in it, so I'm going to put the article at the bottom so people can read it for themselves. There are a few points I want to challenge. One, and the last point, I want to challenge because I don't think it goes far enough, if that makes sense. This is the article, just so you know what I'm talking about and you have a reference point. Bernie's army in disarray. And then they have the Sanders of a bewildered Bernie. The Sanders-inspired grassroots group Our Revolution is flailing. An extensive review by Politico shows fueling concerns about a potential 2020 bid. This is amazing. An extensive review by Politico. I have no idea what that means. I don't know what they mean by extensive review. That's the first point. So that tries to give this idea that they've jumped into the numbers and they've come up with stuff. What you find is a smattering of people who talked about this and this kind of anonymous group of nebulous people who are supposedly in the scenes in regards to our revolution, giving certain statements. Do you remember the Assange thing where they said The Guardian comes out with the smear of Assange, and coming out with the smear of Assange, they said Assange has a spying apparatus, and that spying apparatus and he was hacking into the Ecuadorian embassy while he was in his thing. Now, this was nonsense. The previous president, if they would have waited to have a conversation with the president, Correa, I think is his name, he would have told him that that's not a spying apparatus, that is a security service, because the UK was talking about breaking in and stealing him, creating an international incident, and we needed to protect the person who was in our custody, in our care. That's kind of the way this article is in some respects. This kind of warped way of going about a story. And so a few main points that I want to make. They continuously make the connection between Sanders and Our Revolution, saying that any activities of Our Revolution somehow negatively reflects on Sanders, despite even in the article saying that there is no association between the two. Sanders might have instilled his workable point of view into this organization and allowed that organization to go about its way. But he's not in constant operations with that Our Revolution. To say that whatever takes place with Our Revolution directly negatively impacts Sanders, it's nonsense. It's utter nonsense. They're not connected. The article itself even admits that they're not connected. That's the first point. The second point. No major successes. The article makes the point that the group is flailing and that because they've had no major successes. Now, all of this depends on the operative word major. What do you mean by major? In whose eyes are you talking about major? Major is so flexible of a word that the word can be stretched to mean all sorts of things. The article itself admits that they've won 40% of the races that they've gotten into. It's just the majority of these have been on local levels or state or local levels. That's not minor. Socialists winning in Virginia is not minor. The people that they've been supporting have been running all throughout the United States and winning. The article acts as if this is just nothing. It literally throws all of this away and acts as if it's nothing. It's amazing of them to read. In which case they say there have been no major successes, and then later on have to admit, okay, they won 40%. 40% of the races. The other point that they're making is directly at Nina Turner, saying that Nina Turner is somewhat of a problem being in that role. This is nonsense. This is nonsense. And what they're using to make this point are somewhat of a non-transparent way in which people are appointed, meaning the people who they say they want to represent, and saying that she's too aggressive in going after Democrats. This is nonsense. She's not aggressive enough. That's what I would say. I would say Miss Nina Turner is not aggressive enough. And, I love me some Nina Turner. Look, the fact is, in the British government, when Jeremy Corbyn took over, oftentimes you would have this exchange between the Tories and Labour, Corbyn, where Corbyn would make a point and said, you guys are doing this. And the Tory government would get up and say, well, your previous government did this too. Credibility is the issue. In order for Nina Turner to actually show credibility between who they are versus what the Democratic Party is, they need to show distinction. It is vitally important that you understand that you are not the same entity and quantity that the Democratic Party currently is. Fact is, if the Democratic Party was representing its philosophical basis, you wouldn't need an Our Revolution. The fact that Our Revolution, brand new Congress, Justice Democrat, the fact that these groups exist shows the failure and ineptitude of the current Democratic Party. If you as a politician wants to get something done, and as you as a politician is using the husk of the Democratic Party to do that, and you actually want to represent the interests of your constituents because you took that politics stuff to heart, this idea that you can actually do things to advance the causes of the people who are putting you in those offices. If there is some corporatist hack that's in your way, then you need to go through that corporatist hack. And part of the way of doing that is showing a disparity and a distinction between who you are and what you represent versus the non-value thing, or the thing that has values that are not necessarily in line with what the ideologically, supposedly, Democratic Party values are. Yeah, she's going to cut through them. Yeah, she's going to be strident and loud as she goes about taking them apart. And she should be strident and loud when she goes about taking them apart. They failed! They've lost 1,100 seats. Are you telling me that this level of failure doesn't demand a certain amount of ridicule? Yeah, she's going after these people. She should go after these people because they have failed at a magnificent level. They failed at a magnificent level. I would make the argument that if you lose the House or the presidency to a reality show host, if you lose to the most rabid bunch of Republicans in the House, the Senate, Supreme Court, and 1,100 seats all throughout the country, then yeah, there's a certain amount of ridicule that's demanded in the way that people are going about prosecuting the case against you. And if these people are in the primaries and they're running against you, and if Our Revolution is supporting them, then Nina Turner has all the moral responsibility in the world to rip them apart. Party be damned. This is about getting stuff done and about representing their constituents. Yes, I agree with her being aggressive as she goes after some of these Democratic hacks that are in these offices. The other part in the argument that they make is that they stood out, that Our Revolution didn't get into some big races. And again, so what? They're acting as if them not getting into races is somewhat of a negative thing. If you don't have anybody in that race that represents the interests that you're trying to espouse, why on earth would you get into the race? Imagine the ridiculousness of Our Revolution, who's supposed to have these kind of Bernie Sanders values, supporting Doug Jones. Why would you do that? The goal of Our Revolution is not purely just to get whatever random Democrat that can get into a spot. That is not the objective and the goal of Our Revolution. Our Revolution is trying to get certain people in that office that have a workable point of view similar to the point of view of Sanders. And those are the values of the organization. Why would it burn itself by putting in any random Democrat? Why the hell would Our Revolution, for example, support Joe Manchin? Why would it do that? It would make no sense. So yeah, that's the other thing that they try to hit him with, which is somewhat of a nonsense complaint. One of the other attacks that they use, and yeah, I'm going through the attacks themselves, but I'm going to put the article so you guys can read. It has to do with saying that the organization is not making enough money. It's like Sanders has shot his load, and again, comparing it with Sanders, and that the organization itself is not raising enough money, and that the valued Sanders list that's supposed to have had, honeysuckle and lemon dripping from it at every moment, that list wasn't enough to get Dennis Kucinich in office, and that list wasn't enough to essentially raise the funds that they expected to raise. Now, what they're using is the Virginia race. In fact, let me just show it. This article is amazing in the ridiculousness and the nonsense in the way that they're looking at our revolution. And the standards that they're using for this are warped. There was, in the Virginia race, and I'm in Virginia, Bernie Sanders was supporting Tom Perriello. They're trying to make the case that says, well, we expected Sanders to raise over $100,000, meaning in raising, meaning the list was able to raise X amount of money. But the list only raised $50,000, And so the article is making the point of saying, and this list is not even as valued, or Sanders essentially shot his load and doesn't have the carte blanche that people think he has. Completely ignoring who Tom Perriello is. I didn't vote for Perriello. It wasn't because Sanders didn't get across the idea of the endorsement. It's because I didn't believe that he was what he said he was, which was the problem with him. He couldn't get across this idea that he was a lefty because he wasn't a lefty. That had nothing to do with Sanders. That has everything to do with the candidate. And yet they ignored the candidate in the process. They act as if Sanders has a magic wand and Sanders just bestowed. No. There's a candidate that's running in that particular process. And if that candidate can't get across his bona fides, that candidate is not going to get elected. That candidate didn't get elected. That has nothing to do with Sanders. That's not the fault of our revolution. It's the fault of the candidate himself. This article is absurd. If you want to make an attack on Nina Turner, if you wanted to make an attack on our revolution, fair enough. Nobody is above reproach. But the attacks should have some level of merit and should make some level of sense. If you want to make an attack on the idea of the transparency in which they come about their people or pick their people, fair enough. I think it makes all the sense in the world that they would have chose Dennis Kucinich because Dennis Kucinich was the one that represented the values of our revolution. But whatever. If you want to pick a fight on that part, I don't all that care that much. I care about some of the other attacks that I just talked about because these attacks don't necessarily really make sense. But this is the bulk of the article. One of the last claims of the article attacks this woman, Teslin Figueroa. Now, they make the point that Nina Turner tried to appoint her to a position in our revolution, that the board balked, and that in balking, Nina Turner wasn't able to do this, and they found that the woman was somehow on the payroll. The wild part about this is they act as if this is, again, an example of it being in disarray, as opposed to it being something that the board just rejects. She's not a god. She's not a king. She has a board, and she puts the stuff up to a vote like anybody else. But according to them, this is disarray. Everything is in disarray. Everything is chaos. Everything is falling apart. Everything is falling apart according to Politico. Your article, dude, is nonsense. Who wrote this article? And by the way, she responded to this because she was somewhat pissed off that they didn't wait and get a comment from her on this subject. They tried to say that the woman was racist and that the woman was pushing an anti-immigrant agenda, and you had certain Latinos that was on the board that left or that were angry at Nina Turner trying to appoint this woman to the position. This woman says she was hurt by this and pissed off by this. Spanish and black woman, it's unfortunate that you chose to slander me without ever speaking to me to address your concerns, so sis, let me help you out. The person who essentially said that they left, she's making a point. I'm black and Latina, and you're trying to say that I was being essentially on Fox News bashing immigrants. She's saying that is nonsense. I looked her up on Fox News. I was looking for that particular episode and I couldn't find the episode. And they didn't have a link to it, so I couldn't necessarily even go to the link to see what Politico was talking about. I'm going to put this article at the bottom, and there's one more thing. Right here. The focus on Politico article of Turner's attempt to hire Teslin Figueroa as our revolution chief of staff is an example, or is an extension of this barrage of criticism towards Turner. A disagreement on the hire is framed as a disarray among those in the organization, with unsourced claims that Figueroa was praised Trump, which Figueroa has refuted. Figueroa, who served on the National Justice Board for Bernie Sanders in 2016 campaign, is never mentioned On Twitter, Figueroa criticized the article for never reaching out to her or anyone she worked with to defend herself from. Cited she has 15 years of experience organizing and working on campaigns and dispelling a claim she criticized immigrants on Fox News. That's the other part. They tried to say that Nina Turner tried to hire this woman, and this woman had no experience whatsoever working on in this position. This woman saying this is nonsense. Not only did I not do what you're saying I did on Fox News, I have a ton of experience going back for 15 years in this particular subject. This article was nonsense. You may take issue with the transparency issue, but understand this is a new organization. The organization is just starting. It's been around for like 2 years. 40% of the people who they put up have won their seats. Yes, this has mainly been in state and local elections, but it's still local and state elections. These are people who are being put into those offices. Democrats have lost 1,100 seats all throughout the country. You got to start back winning somewhere. And our revolution has started winning those seats, despite our revolution have just started. I would make the case that the difference and the distinction that our revolution can create is to the better. It's to the better, let's say it that way. Meaning, people are sick of the current party politics. And part of the problem that you're going to run in as a Democrat, meaning our revolution, is that people are sick of the Democratic Party. They don't have this belief that the party is working for regular people. They don't have this belief that they're working for unions. And those people would be absolutely right. Ultimately, you have a Democratic Party that has looked at all of these groups and told them you have nowhere else to go, so fall in line. If you want to make headway and you want to break that, then you need to get across something fundamentally different than the method that Democrats have been using to run. Running with this model of Sanders is great. I also love the edge that Nina Turner brings to this, and I would say that edge needs to get sharper, especially when you're going into the primaries and you're going to try to win some of these seats. If there is a difference between who you are and who they are, that difference needs to show, and that difference needs to be exacerbated. This article from Politico is nonsense. It's utter nonsense. I read through it and I kept thinking to myself, but that's not a bad thing. Like, throughout the article, I kept thinking, well, so what? Or this has nothing to do with Sanders. Or, let me say it this way. No group is perfect and no group is above reproach. This organization has just started. This organization is literally at the beginning. Their goal in this is to propagate a certain point of view all throughout the United States. And 2 years in, they're not in disarray. This is a narrative that the media is trying to create. They're doing their job. They're doing their job like any other organization is trying to create some kind of revolution or trying to create some kind of change. I am welcoming or offering Nina Turner a spot to talk about this. Meaning, I've sent her a tweet or a direct message. If she wants to have a conversation about this hit piece, I welcome this forum for her to talk about it. Because that's the way I actually see this is. I see this as a hit piece. Ultimately, you have Politico. Politico wrote an article like this prior, talking about disarray, going back, I think, last year when the organization had just started. And here we are again, essentially a recycled hit piece against Nina Turner and our revolution. I'll put the article at the bottom so you can read for yourself. I made my case, so I'm not going to reiterate it. But yeah, I think this is nonsense. Baltazar, Politico, time-traveling mutant alien robot colluding with Eric. Really? Trump through Roger Stone via Randy credit card hacked our website. That's hilarious. Cheeky Rogue. There is the key, Jamal. There's no difference. Freaking Uniparty runs the show. Cheeky Rogue. No. I agree with you, Cheeky Rogue. But I think Nina Turner is trying to do something different, which is kind of my point. If they are going to show a distinction between who the Democratic Party is versus who they are, and I am creating that mental distinction in my head that our revolution, because our revolution doesn't support every candidate. Part of the complaint in this article was that they weren't supporting each and every random candidate. They have a very certain segment of the population that they want to propagate. I agree with the segment of the population in general that they want to propagate. So yeah, why would they pick each and every Democrat? The point I'm getting at is if they're really trying to propagate the point of view of Sanders, then yeah, they're going to be different. I mean, the question becomes, how do you make that difference clear when you're running in those primaries? And not just make those differences clear, how do you advance your objectives in those primaries? Meaning, how does our revolution help those candidates when they're running in those primaries to affect that change? There is no difference between the parties, or at the very least, the differences are so minute. And I would even make an argument that the Democratic Party is worse because the Democratic Party instantiates a certain status quo that doesn't really get anything done. At most, you have this incrementalism with a batshit rabid Republican Party making this incrementalism seem normal. It's not. If Nina Turner is going to make any headway, she needs to show a clear distinction between who she is and the candidates they represent versus who the Democratic Party is and who the Democratic Party puts up as their representatives. So, I understand what you're saying, Chikaro, but I do think she is trying to do something somewhat different. Whether she can pull it off or not is a second question. They've had success in local elections, not so much on the federal level. But again, they've just started. It's like Politico wants a revolution in a day or in a year. Garnome, Harlan, if you can't recognize that Nina Turner acted as a DNC coordinator whose function is to bring the far left, I don't know what to tell you. I mean, it depends, man. One of the questions that I really want to ask Nina Turner is there anything that would happen that you would lead to the party? And, me saying this right now may completely end any chance of me having an interview with her because she doesn't necessarily want to answer questions like this. But, I mean, that question is pertinent. Like, is there anything that the party can do? Is there any level of cheating? Is there any level of manipulation or putting their thumb on the scale? Is there any level of anything that they can do where she would say, I'm done? For that matter, would she support third-party candidates? Now, I've seen her make certain head nods to certain organizations that were third parties. I've seen her do a head nod to the People's Party. I've seen her do a head nod to Nick Brana's thing with Bernie Sanders running as independent. But I don't necessarily know if she's taken that extra step of actually supporting candidates that were in third parties. And she may actually full on believe that there's no way to get a third party to work, in which case, God knows you'd be right. I know people don't like to hear that, but that would be true. Now, whether the caliber of Democrat would be the same under Turner or somebody else, well, that's a different conversation. But just somewhat of as a flat fact, I think you're right, Gardner. I think her goal is to kind of sheepdog people into the Democratic Party. The question becomes, what type of people are she trying to sheepdog into the party, and what type of people is she trying to get elected in our revolution? I think that's where the question becomes in. So I agree with you in technicalities. I don't necessarily know if I agree with you in sentiment of what she's trying to accomplish, if that makes sense. This is all op-ed knit. Sure, why do you keep bringing that up as if it's relevant? Nina or Bernie should join Stein. Politico is getting to MSNBC level. Sometimes they have really good stories, but this was not, this was just a hit piece. Jamal, did you see Bernie on Chuck Todd interview this past Sunday towards the end? He calls out the NRA. I did not see that. And if Bernie Sanders is calling out the NRA, that may mean Bernie Sanders is talking about running for an election. If you remember, one of the things that they hit him on last time was supposedly his support for the gun lobby. He has like a D rating, but support for the gun lobby. It's very possible that Sanders is trying to push those things to the side, at the very least to get his bona fides up. So, for example, he's been doing foreign policy speeches, talking about Israel, talking about what's going on with Russia. He's been doing more speeches where he himself has been giving responses to things that makes it look like he's running. It makes it look like he's trying to be somewhat of a contender in regards to the presidential sphere. Oh, by the way, one of the other attacks they used on Nina Turner was she's too busy trying to run for president of the United States, saying that is she trying to support Sanders or is she actually trying to run? She is she's the front person of this group. They're acting as if her getting out there being the front person of this group during her job is somehow a pitch for running for president. This was nonsense. This article was nonsense. This article is a hit piece. That's all this article is. That's literally all this article is. Tomosa Young, come on, it's fair and balanced reporting by Politico. Fair and balanced, my ass. There are factions within the Democratic Party that fight with one another, yes, but ultimately they answer to the same masters. I agree, yes. Are venerable to the same sticks and carrots. Our revolution is not real reform. I think I agree with you, but up to a point. And again, words are slippery. If you're talking about something that's a fundamental change, no. It still works within the same political system. And you can make a fair argument that says the incentives built into the system will prevent any kind of work of being done in the system itself, meaning the system protects itself from doing anything. We've had political change in this country, though. I mean, people act like it's impossible to get some kind of corruption, some kind of push for anti-corruption stuff. We've had political change in this country before. It feels like it's impossible. It feels like it can never take place. But, Gardner, I agree with you. Ultimately, this still functioning within the same system. That part I agree with you on. You mean corporate masters, yes. They're really pushing it. They keep this shit up. They're going to see a real revolution. Well, Sanders is trying to do it from the political standpoint. And I don't think his army is in disarray at all. I think if his army is in disarray, it has more to do with Sanders working in coordination with the Democratic Party than it really has to do with our revolution. And these two things are separate. Our revolution is functioning on its own. And by the way, if it was me, I would do the same thing that Sanders is doing. I would create an organization that has my workable point of view, and I would push that organization out there. And then I would go out and I would campaign and run, everything else being separate and distinct from the organization, but putting somebody at the head that is fiery, that is aggressive, that can try to enforce my agenda throughout the United States. He's doing what he's supposed to do. And Nina Turner is doing what she's supposed to do. Baltazar, they're more fair and balanced in the clip with Doug and Rob Ford on the seesaw while MSNBC reporters talk about jacking your sibling off. What? There's more fair and balanced in the clip with Doug and Rob Ford. I remember that on the seesaw while MSNBC reporter about jacking your sibling off. Oh, Jesus Christ. Gardner, meanwhile, Harlan, you're not even giving an opinion. You're simply trying to attack my position with vague irrelevances. What did Harlan say? I'm curious. You might have the talking points that affect your own cognitive dissonance. Nice and so, Gardner, I can only type the words in like your elucidations. I like the elucidations. Look, guys, I don't think you guys are saying... Let's be honest. I mean, this show, I try to keep the show from standpoint of looking at this stuff in context and looking at this stuff and being honest about it. You have a spectrum. And I think, Gardner, you'd agree with me that there are factions within the Democratic Party. Of course. You have plutocrats and you have the corporatists. Our revolution, if anything, definitely trends towards the side of the left. Now, the question becomes how far left, but it definitely trends towards the side of the left. That being said, it is still functioning within a world where cash influences the system. The question about who pays them. Now, the people who our revolution are putting up are not necessarily getting money from corporate donors and they're getting their money from the public itself. I can't necessarily be mad at that, especially that as being somewhat of a sea change in how people are funded and how people go about their affairs. The question becomes, is this enough for significant change? And can you get that level of change under the model to which we find ourselves? Meaning, in a world with citizens united, is it possible to get change in the political system in a real substantial way? I don't know, man. Part of me wants to say we've had political change before, and so I can't necessarily completely discount it taking place. Do I think it would take place with our revolution? It depends on whether or not Nina Turner would be willing to walk. If everything boils down to pushing in a Democrat, then no, you're not going to get real change. But our revolution has not, one of the things that they hit revolution for is not necessarily choosing any random Democrat. That's a good thing. That means they're willing to let some of these people lose if these people are not towing a particular agenda. My disposition tends to be more strident than that. But in an odd way, that is somewhat my disposition. Vote for the person who represents your interests. If they don't, let them fail. So, is that enough to get real change? I don't know. But it's a start. It's definitely a start. And do I believe that the people that Turner is trying to put up in our revolution are further to the left? Yes, I do. Is it possible that she doesn't believe that you can get real change outside the party itself? Meaning, She doesn't believe that it's possible to actually have a candidate run as a third party. That may be true, in which case, in her mind, her mindset, she only works from the standpoint of a democratic framework, democratic Republican. She may believe that the machinery itself is much more easy to use as opposed to starting something new. I don't know if that's true or not, but she's trying, and she's going to exhaust her potential. So, Balthazar 228, if you're not on a spectrum, you're on Xfinity or Cox corporate consolidation. No antitrust enforcement. Missed an earlier super chat. No. This was my first super chat. Nina is not a quote-unquote enemy. She is a cog in an undemocratic system which serves her own volition. Supporting her means supporting the DNC. I can't disagree with that. Honestly, I can't disagree with that. I want to, but I can't disagree with that. Linza. What's happening, Linza? But I'm going to put a caveat in that, Gardner. I think Nina Turner believes that it's possible to change the DNC. Or at the very least possible to pull it in a particular direction. I don't know if that's true. And I think my biggest complaint with our revolution in this case, or my biggest complaint with lefties in general, is that they don't take the disposition that they need to leave in order to try to pull the party in a particular direction. Nevertheless, she tries to get it done through democratic politics. I don't think she's an enemy. I think she's working in earnest. It's a separate question on whether she can get anything done, but I think she's working in earnest. So I'm going to end this one here. We've been 30 minutes, and I really only wanted this one to be like 15. Yeah. Piano Man, Americans just sit at home and never take to the streets like Europeans would. Yeah. I mean, the thing is, though, look, not everybody is going to take the same disposition that we have. And I asked the question to myself, what's their disposition? Is their disposition earnest when they're going about their affairs? I think she's earnest. Now, whether or not you think she's getting anything accomplished, that's a separate question. But I do think she's earnest in the way she's going about it. I think part of the reason they're hitting her on Politico was because she is so strident when she's pushing a particular agenda. And yeah, I think she is trying to show a distinction between who she is and the people who she put up versus who the Democratic Party is. She may very well believe that there is no way of dealing with this outside of the political party structure that we have here. And, I'm not sure I agree with that. Or at the very least, I think if you want to change the party, you have to be willing to lead it. So I'm going to leave this here. I love me some Nina Turner. I still stand by that this was a hit piece. I'm going to put both pieces, one from Common Cause and one from Politico itself. I think as you read through it, what you would find is it's like, this is a Orwellian way of looking at this. This is an odd way of looking at this. There's nothing to back this particular thing up. Like, it's that type of article. I mean, it's an odd article, and it's an odd way of focusing specifically on Nina Turner in the way that they go about her. It's an amazing article. And by amazing, I mean amazingly poorly written and amazingly poorly done. So, I love me some Nina Turner. I think Nina Turner is doing a great job at the helm of our revolution. If anything, I wish she was more definitive and more strident in making a delineation between who she is and what she represents versus who the Democratic Party is and what they represent. So, I'll leave it at that. Because, look, by the way, if you're not supporting each and every Democrat, then you are creating a distinction. Whether she wants to call it that or not, she is literally, in our revolution, creating a distinction between the candidates who have that particular workable point of view of Sanders and would espouse and do a certain agenda versus the other Democrats. So making that distinction clear and bright red for each and every person to see, it's her job. It's her job. And in fact is, like I said before, you wouldn't need in our revolution if Democrats hadn't failed so magnificently in regards to living up to their philosophical responsibilities to the public that puts them in those offices. So I will leave it here. I want to thank all of you guys for showing up. Oh, Jesus Christ, Balthazar. I was visiting my mother over the weekend. I received a call from the DLCC asking for 300 or 150, and I told them to fuck off for 2016 nonsense. Are you serious, Baltazar? They called you. It's like, we need money. We need money. And Baltazar tells them to fuck off. That's amazing. Good for you, Baltazar. Garnome. Also, reformers need to stop forming emotional attachments to these people. I agree. I mean, like I said, my question usually boils down to, is there anything that the party would do that you would say, I'm done? And if there is nothing that the party would do where you say, I'm done, then can we just admit that you're beholden to the party in total, that you're essentially a sheepdog to the Democratic Party regardless of what the party does? Like, if there's no backstop, if there's no depths of depravity that the party could go where you would say, I'm done. I mean, at that point, it's like, how can you ever get anything done in that landscape, in that political landscape, where you believe that there is no air outside of the political landscape? There's air out here. There are people dancing. Until you decide that you want to pull away and leave, or at the very least open that potential up to leave, it is going to be a hard thing to change a party that believes that it can get those people back, not because of anything that it's doing, but because of who Trump is. So, we'll see. I open up this forum to have a conversation with Miss Turner. I love me some Miss Turner. That hasn't changed. But Lord knows I have questions. And at the very least, even if she didn't want to talk about that point and she just wanted to talk about the hit piece itself, I would absolutely offer the space for her to have a conversation on Politico's hit piece on our revolution. So I would love for that to take place. They're losing to Trump and will continue to do so. You know, that blue wave is looking less and less likely. It may take place, but it is looking less and less likely, or the very least, polls have been narrowing. You have millennials that have been leaving the party in droves. It doesn't represent anything. And that's what it boils down to. Do you understand? Like, Donald Trump didn't get in because Donald Trump had all these policies and people believed him. He was a no vote. He was a no vote to the status quo. In the same way that Brexit was no. We vote no. We vote no. I don't give a shit about Brexit. I'm voting no to you. To whatever you have as status quo, we are throwing a brick into your window. That's what Donald Trump was, a brick into the window. Obama said he was hope and change. Donald Trump gets in. Everybody knows he was going to be some level of change, even if he was going to be chaotic. They got the change. It's not necessarily the change they wanted. It was a brick through the window of the establishment. The assault that Donald Trump is ripping all of these things apart, attacking the media, attacking education, attacking the FBI, the CIA, attacking all of these institutions. And to some degree, he has the support of his base, because all of these are the institutions, these liberal institutions that have failed him, that failed all of us. Those people are not wrong for wanting hope and change and then not necessarily having that deliver. That being said, you've had 20 or 30% of those people who voted for Obama that went to Trump. So yeah, if the DNC is failing on this, they're failing on their own merits. Again, doubling down on the same strategy that Trump is going to eat your babies and Trump is going to kick your puppies. So even if you don't like the random candidate that we put in, we still should select the candidate. If this works, part of me hopes this fails miserably, because at the very least, if it fails miserably, you can point to it and say your status quo idea, again, failed. The problem is the real world consequences to that idea failing. By the same token, it's real world consequences to them succeeding. So, damned if you do, damned if you don't. All right, guys. If you enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe, and of course, you guys can always support the Patreon. Thanks, guys.